Hi, everybody. I'm Jimmy DeYoung. Welcome to another prophecy moment. We'll take 5 or 10 minutes, look at a major headline, a passage of scripture, some event that's happening in our world that seemingly is setting the stage for Bible prophecy to be fulfilled. The headline for this broadcast today: Chinese coronavirus conspiracy. You've heard of that, of course, and I'm sure the media that you may have been watching is covering it from one side or the other. Many of them are skirting the issue. They don't want to deal with it. Some of them are also standing with the president, President Trump, that this is the Chinese coronavirus that we're dealing with. But the other part of the media is going after President Trump for using that particular statement. Well, it's a pretty controversial statement, but I want to deal with the issue right here on Prophecy Moment. I'm going to bring to my broadcast table my broadcast partner, Ken Timmerman. Ken is a world-renowned journalist, traveling the entire world and covering every major story that you can think about over the last couple of decades. Also, in addition to that, he is a best-selling author. And Ken knows something that you may need to understand. That's why I'm bringing him to the table as it relates to this Chinese coronavirus conspiracy. Let's take a moment, listen to what Ken has to say. Seems like there's some kind of a conspiracy. Can you talk to that issue with us between China and the coronavirus? What is really going on?
Well, on Monday, the president sent a letter to the Secretary General, Dr. Tedros, of the World Health Organization, saying, we will cut U.S. funding to you permanently if you don't reform within 30 days, and then if you don't give us full and complete information within 30 days of what happened in the early stages of the coronavirus outbreak. Here's what the president is alleging, and it's not only Donald Trump. You can put together a chronology of these events yourself if you spend the time doing it from the public sources. In the early stages of the outbreak, in November and December, the Chinese did their very best to keep everything quiet. They didn't want news to leak out. When researchers discovered that there was a novel coronavirus causing the outbreak of pneumonia in Wuhan in mid and late December, they started to talk about this over social media, and they shared the results with other scientists. The Chinese government then stepped in and shut down the social media networks. They convoked the scientists to the intelligence ministry headquarters in Wuhan and made them sign confessions that they were essentially counter-revolutionaries and spreading rumors and lies. This was at the end of December. So the Chinese knew at the end of December that they had a real problem, an outbreak of a potentially pandemic proportions on their hands, and they sought to shut down any information about it. Their communications with the World Health Organization were similar. They first told them about the cases of pneumonia on December 31st, but said, no, don't worry, it's not serious. On January 5th, the WHO first talked about it, but they said, no big deal, we're working with the Chinese. Well, they weren't working with the Chinese. They were taking Chinese propaganda. It wasn't until the end of January, after Dr. Tedros met in Beijing with President Xi, the president of China, that he had the agreement from Xi to send an international team to Wuhan who didn't arrive until the end of February, just about the end of February, to look into what was happening. So you had this almost 2-month period where the Chinese were shutting down information. At the same time, Chinese citizens, people who had been in Wuhan, were getting on flights and going to Seattle, Washington, going to Los Angeles, going to New York, going to Europe, and spreading the virus worldwide. So my take on this is that the Chinese felt that if the virus remained inside China, it would be a Chinese problem. But if the virus escaped to the world, it would be a worldwide problem. So then you see the second phase of the issue with China and their duplicity, is that once the virus escaped, and now we're talking about, end of January going into February, once the virus escaped and became a worldwide problem, then the Chinese tried to hype the dangers of the virus, of the pandemic. They got the WHO to eventually declare it a pandemic on the 3rd of March, and that led to the shutting down of economies in the United States and in Europe with devastating, absolutely devastating impact on families and businesses around the world. So China, by doing that, by getting the WHO to hype the threat, the Chinese then felt that they could gain an economic advantage over the United States, ultimately as part, I believe, of their long-term goal to defeat America and to replace America as the world's hegemon, or the world's superpower, if you wish.
An amazing report from Ken Timmerman on the so-called Chinese coronavirus conspiracy. Well, it is a pandemic, we know for sure. As to whether it's a conspiracy or not, there's going to have to be more investigation to come to that final collusion. But we do need to understand that what is happening in our world is a part of a Chinese effort to be the world most powerful superpower. What I mean by that, and you'll have to recognize they're a part of the three superpowers of the world today: Russia, America, and China. But China wants to be the superpower, standing alone as the superpower of this world. The Bible tells us prophetically that that will be the case. Number of things you need to understand. The United States is not in Bible prophecy, and Russia will be leading that coalition of Islamic states to try to wipe Israel off the face of the earth in the beginning of the 7-year period of time. Now, that passage from the book of Revelation, chapter 16, would be most likely played out in the last 7 months of the 7-year tribulation period, just prior to Jesus Christ coming back to the earth. But let's talk about several things as we think about China and their role in end-time prophecy. We have to admit, again, as I stated just a moment ago, China is among the most powerful nations in the world: Russia, America, and China. But again, China wants to be the number one. They want to be the number one economically, politically, and militarily. Well, the Bible does tell us, as I said, that will be the case. If you'll go with me over to Revelation chapter 16, and we're going to look at there's 21 judgments in the tribulation period. We're going to look at number 20, just prior to the 21st of the judgments, which is the destruction of Babylon, the literal city of Babylon, which is modern-day Iraq today. But we're going to look at the 6 vial judgments. These vial judgments most likely taking place in the last 7 months of the tribulation period. Here's chapter 16, verse 12. And the 6th angel poured out his vial upon the great river Euphrates. Now, the Euphrates River is a natural border between the Middle East and the Far East. It comes out of Russia, comes down through Turkey, goes through Syria, through Iraq, and then into the Persian Gulf. It's dividing the Middle East from the Far East. And as this river flows down through that location, it's going to be dried up. Here's the rest of the passage. And as this vial is poured into the great river Euphrates, the water thereof was dried up, that the way of the kings of the east might be prepared. The way for what? For these kings of the east, these nations out in the Far East, to go into Jerusalem. You remember the book of Zechariah, chapter 14 and verse 2 says, all the nations of the world will be gathered at Jerusalem at the time of the second coming of Jesus Christ. Let me remind you, in the seal judgments found there in Revelation chapter 6 and in verses 7 and 8, that 4th seal judgment is 1/4 of the earth's population being destroyed. 1/4 of the earth's population. And then when you go to the trumpet judgments over there in chapter 9, verse 16, another 1/3 of the judgments are on the earth will take out another 1/3 of all the population of the earth. So that's half the earth's population, with the half remaining, those nations, those kings out of the Far East, which the river Euphrates is dried up so they can come into Jerusalem. You see, the only peoples alive out of the 7 billion plus people on the earth today will be those nations out of the Far East, the kings of the Far East. China has most likely somewhere in the area about 1.6 billion people that live there in China. Over in India, it's about 1.4. That's almost the half of the entire Earth's population. You add in North Korea, South Korea, you add in Japan, and then you have half the peoples of the earth today, and that will remain there at the last 7 months or 6 months of the tribulation period before that 7-year period of time comes to a conclusion with the return of Jesus Christ. At that time, China will be a major player. They're going to be in partnership with the Antichrist. Now, he will be located in Babylon. Revelation 18 talks about Babylon. That's the literal city of Babylon, about 58 miles out of downtown Baghdad in modern-day Iraq. The Antichrist, after destruction and the abomination of desolation there at the temple in Jerusalem, goes to Babylon, sets up a one-world economic, political, governmental system. Well, in order to rule over somebody, they're going to have to do that in partnership with those nations, and those Far Eastern nations will be the only ones alive. And therefore, China, in cooperation with the Antichrist, will have the world take that mark on the forehead or the back of the hand so they can buy or sell, so that they can sustain life. That's a partnership that China will be in those last 6 months of the tribulation period. And Jesus Christ, as China and the other Far Eastern nations cross the Euphrates River, make their way into Jerusalem, will return to Jerusalem. That's how that end time scenario is going to take place, and that's the importance of China, one of those kings of the earth, and I should say Red China, with their mass population and their mighty military might, coming into Jerusalem to take on the Messiah, Jesus Christ, as he returns. Have you been listening closely? If you have, I'm sure you just caught that there's going to be an Antichrist headquartered in Babylon, the literal city of Babylon in modern-day Iraq. There's going to be an alignment of nations that will have come and been destroyed, giving half the earth, that population, out of Red China and India and the Far Eastern nations, the ones who would come into Jerusalem. So Babylon will play a key role there, and then China a key role. You see, as I've given you this information from God's Word and from what's happening in our world today, you can recognize that that stage has been set. The Chinese coronavirus conspiracy is helping prepare this world for what is going to happen in the last days just prior to Jesus Christ coming back to the earth. But the good news is this. All the stage may be set, but 7 years before China, the Antichrist, and Jesus meet there in the city of Jerusalem, 7 years before that, the blessed hope, that rapture of the church, will take place. We'll be caught up to meet him in the air. We'll not go through any of that 7-year period of time. I want you to take that away from our broadcast today, Prophecy Moment. We have a blessed hope. The rapture is going to happen, and this world seems set for it to happen right now. And having said that, nothing left for me to say, except let's keep looking up until